Okay, I'm Patricia Christensen. My first name's Patricia. The last name Christensen, Christensen. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I served in Peace Corps Ukraine 2004 to 2006.
Okay. We're going to start off, though, by asking you about your background before Peace Corps. Some family information, your parents, brothers and sisters, also where you grew up. Okay? So, go ahead.
So I am originally from Lawton. I was born at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. My father was in the military. He served in the Army for 20 years. My mother mostly taught school. She taught high school and now currently teaches college. She still lives in Lawton. I have an older sister, a younger sister, and a younger brother. My older sister was a middle school teacher my older sister was a elementary school teacher. She teaches younger grades, mostly music and reading. My younger sister was a middle school teacher for a number of years and is now currently a lawyer. She does primarily federal public defense. And my younger brother is a musician. He has a doctorate in instrumental music and teaches at a community college. Is the director of instrumental music. Both my sisters and my brothers all have degrees in music and/or music education. I went to school I did my undergraduates in Parkville, Missouri, at Park College. I studied international business and economics. I have undergraduates in international business, an undergraduate in economics, both bachelors, and then came back to Lawton and did my MBA at Cameron University. And I finished that right before I left for Texas. I served as an AmeriCorps volunteer, AmeriCorps Vista.
Oh, really? You were
volunteer. Right after I finished my MBA, I served at Texas Tech University with Jumpstart for Young Children as an AmeriCorps Vista member. I worked with an AmeriCorps state national teams that work with early childhood, early Head Starts, doing social emotional development and school readiness. It was a lot of fun to do. While I was serving as a Vista member,
You were in AmeriCorps and Vista at the same time?
AmeriCorps Vista is, so it started out as Vista in the 1960s, and then in the early 1990s was rolled under the umbrella of AmeriCorps, along with a lot of the early Vista RSVP, Retired Senior Volunteer Program, Foster Grandparents Programs, all were rolled under AmeriCorps. And so when I served, it was considered AmeriCorps Vista.
Okay.
And I served with that program for a year. And while I was doing that, I was filling out my applications for Peace Corps.
Oh, just one thing after the next, huh?
I think I finished my first term as AmeriCorps Vista in November of 2003, and then left for Country for Peace Corps in March of 2004.
Okay.
So I had
now,
a couple months.
Let's go back for a minute to international business. You said you studied international business. As that?
Well, I had decided that I wanted to travel when I was in high school. As I said, my dad was in the military for 20 years. We did not move. We were based in Fort Sill for almost the entire 20 years. So we were not more that traditional Army family that traveled from base to base. And
that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
No, we didn't do any of that. So I really felt like I should have been able to travel more. So I really wanted to travel. So I thought international business would kind of pique all those things, wanting to travel, learn languages, learn different cultures. All of that kind of fell under it.
Well, let me ask this then also. When you're studying international business, were you also, in the back of your mind, were you also thinking about Peace Corps already?
Well, there was a class we had. One of the courses I took as part of my international business degree was a managerial class, business management of some kind. And we had a guest speaker who was a Foreign Service officer that came to our class and spoke about his experience as a Foreign Service officer. And one of the things they mentioned was that a large number of Foreign Service officers had served in the Peace Corps. And I was like, this is what I should do, is I should be a Foreign Service officer, and I could join the Peace Corps, and that means I could travel, I could learn, and I could get my route into joining the Foreign Service. So that was probably the first time I really seriously considered joining the Peace Corps.
So when you were thinking along those lines, you already had, I assume, a pretty positive view of what Peace Corps is.
Yeah, I definitely had a positive view of it. I'll be honest, for a long time, and I have no idea when this began, but I have had a long-standing fascination with the Kennedys and the Kennedy family and the Kennedy legacy, and of course Peace Corps started by John F. Kennedy and Sergeant Shriver. Kennedy was the first director of Peace Corps, and then started the Vista programs as kind of Johnson's War on Poverty. But the Kennedys led Kennedy family members led those programs initially. So I was like, this is. So I had a lot of knowledge about.
You're
the history.
very young though to be big fan of the Kennedys.
When I was in I want to say it was maybe 9th grade, we were going to go to this a government trip where we went to Washington D.C. and we learned about how the government worked and all these things. But there was also this commemorative Kennedy plaque that had speeches that he was supposed to deliver in Dallas and all these things. And
where were you when you saw
I was
this?
maybe in 9th grade. I was
no,
maybe
but I mean,
16.
where
I was
were
here.
you?
I was in Lawton. I was in high school. Maybe.
Where were you seeing the Kennedy plaque?
I don't know. It was on TV.
That's what I mean.
It was for sale. It was like a commemorative. I don't know. It was on QVC or some shopping network.
You weren't seeing this where you were traveling.
I wasn't seeing it when I was traveling. No, this was something I saw on TV.
Okay.
But I was like, I have to have this. This needs to go with my collection of things. And
wow.
And I was maybe 16. And I just remember them being like, well, you can't do both of those things. You either need to pay for this trip or I was like, watch me. And I ended up buying the plaque and going on the trip. But that was, I think,
How much was the plaque? Do you remember?
I want to say it was like $150. I still have it. It's here. I keep it. But I think for Christmas one year, my grandparents put together a Kennedy scrapbook and had clippings from newspaper articles and magazines and everything that they had collected over the years. I still have quite a large collection of memorabilia and books and magazines and newspaper articles. So I had read a lot about Peace Corps and kind of volunteer service by high school. I'd already decided those were things I was interested in. And then...
Were any of your friends interested also?
No.
Did you try to convert some of your friends?
No, not really. I think a lot of them had plans, to go to medical school or to do all these other, other things.
Yeah.
Or become teachers or, whatever they chose to do. But mine was, I wanted to move away and I wanted to travel. So those are some of the things that...
And you saw Peace Corps as a step in that direction. Mm-hmm. Not an end, but a step.
Correct. Yeah, it was sort of, okay, if I once I join Peace Corps, it will help me have a broader perspective. They said if you want to work for the Foreign Service, it helps if you've lived overseas, if maybe you study abroad programs, or Peace Corps was a huge one. Some of those experiences. Mm-hmm. So I...
Did you read any Did you read any articles or any books about that were written by Peace Corps volunteers that said this is what I did?
Not before I decided I was going to go. Not before I had applied.
Yeah.
I was really. I think the first time I actually got all the application materials was in the late 90s after I finished my first undergraduate degree. I had gotten most of the application materials. I started filling out the applications, and I think I got a job. I accepted a job or something. I was like, okay, well, now is probably not the right time to go. And that was sort of in between. So I finished my international business degree in like 1998, and then I had a couple of years, and I came back and I finished my undergrad, my bachelor's in economics. I finished in, I want to say 2000. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go back to school. I decided then I wanted to get a master's degree, and so I decided I'd go back to school, and I only had a few classes I needed to take to get my bachelor's in economics. So I was like, I'll get that and finish those courses off, and then enroll in graduate school.
Seems like your planning was pretty meticulous. I'll
I
do this, then I'll do this, then I'll do this.
Yeah.
So my question is, did you have an ultimate goal in mind, and these were your steps to get there, or did you just decide, I like this, I'm gonna take this?
It's hard to say now. I do feel like I had at least like, okay, I'm gonna do this and then I'll do these next couple of things. But beyond the next couple of things, I hadn't really thought about it. So like I was like, okay, well, I knew I wanted to get a master's degree, but I'd been out of school for a while, so I was like, well, I'll go back and I'll take these other courses and I'll get this degree in economics because I only need a couple of courses, and that'll get me back and going to school. And then while I was doing that, I was applying to graduate schools. But beyond what I was going to do after graduate school, I didn't really know. The same thing was when I was working on my master's degree. By about the time I finished my master's degree, I knew I didn't want to go into corporate America. Like that was, I had realized.
Why is that?
Well, when I was working on my international business degree, we did an internship, an international business internship, and I did an internship with an international sales department of like a trucking company. And I remember, because it's sales, and that's what you would typically think international business was, import and export and all of those, and I always thought that was interesting. But it was really hard to get others that didn't work in those to realize that you can't just sell someone something in Central America. You have to get to know their families, and it takes a long time, and it's not just I'm going to go over there and then I'm going to sell all these things and I've made my sale quota for the month. Like, it takes relationship building to do that work. And I just remember the difficulty and seeing that struggle and knowing like I didn't want to be in that fight. Like, I wanted to be on that relationship side building.
You wanted to understand the culture that you were operating in?
I wanted to know, yes, I wanted to learn more about the people and the culture, and I didn't want to go to that's another thing I wanted to do with Peace Corps. When I wanted to travel, but I didn't want to go to places and see the things that they want you to see to make,
like tourist
things,
spots.
like now you would see here today, you would call it like the Instagram pictures. Like, you didn't want to see those. I wanted to be able to have some local tell me this restaurant that no one is going to be able to find because it's not there. And so I wanted to really be able to know the place I was visiting.
Seems to me that you had a heightened sense of adventure.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know that when other people I hear kind of talk about their stories, it's that kind of thought process doesn't always come out. But that's what I remember, is knowing that I wanted to really
See.
I wanted to, like, I didn't want to just go there and hit the highlights. I wanted to know exactly where I was and what it was like to be there.
And Peace Corps was a program that you knew about that would enable you to do that.
To do that. Yeah,
and there are not a lot of others.
There's not a lot of others, especially not, in 2003 or whatever, especially not in 1998, but definitely not in 2000s, where there weren't even really good, like, oh, you still had travel agents, and you had to plan a whole deal, and it was a thing. But when I was applying for Peace Corps, I remember telling them that I wanted, at the time when you applied, we would choose a region of the world. So now I think you can actually
one
pick
out
an
of 5 or
assignment.
6, maybe?
You would rank your top 3 choices. You would list your top 3 regions of the world. So I had listed Eastern Europe, Northern Africa, and Southwest Asia were the top 3 that I had wanted to go to.
Now let me ask you right away about Europe. Northern Europe, you said. Right?
Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe.
Now, when did those countries come into the Peace Corps fold? I'm not clear on that at all.
It was relatively new.
It was then.
It was relatively new then. I believe that obviously they came in after, most of them came in after independence in 1991. So I want to say, early to mid 90s, they started having Peace Corps volunteers there.
In Eastern Europe.
In Eastern Europe.
Including
European
the Ukraine?
countries, including Ukraine. Yeah, I think, Bulgaria, Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, all of those countries.
I remember that, but I also remember something else at the time. And that was, there was a lot of pushback from some people thinking, we shouldn't be in that part of it. Those are already developed countries compared to the ones in Africa and South America. So there was a big argument that took place. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I remember we used to joke, and I don't know how much Peace Corps would find it funny, but we used to joke that Eastern Europe was Posh Corps.
I've heard that.
It was fancy. You had heat, electricity, and you didn't have to walk 10 miles to get water, and things like that.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I would say that we did have it easier than maybe, Central Africa. That, you lived in village huts and you did have to walk forever to get water or whatever. And but one of the things that I remember about wanting to go to Eastern Europe, and this was something I think I told my recruiter, was I'd studied business and economics, and I just thought it would be fascinating as someone who was studying business and economics to go to a country that was in transition from a communist centralized government to a more marketplace, democratic, capitalist leading.
Bingo. I think you're absolutely
I thought
right.
it would be fascinating to see that be in a time when that transition was happening.
Yep.
So that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to go to Eastern Europe.
All right, why did you want to go to, what were the other 2 you chose?
Northern Africa and Southwest Asia.
And of these 3, did it really matter to you which of the 3 you wound up in?
No, not really. I would have gone to any of them. Any of them. I was interested in Northern Africa. I'd studied French in high school, and I was like, I could go there. For some reason, I've always wanted to go to Morocco. I can't really explain why, but I have. It's still on my list of places. I've always had a fascination with Egypt and that parts of Africa that I feel like they're beautiful countries and would be interesting places to be in. A lot of history and that kind of thing. So would have loved to go there. It's still on my list. If I ever do Peace Corps again, it's high on my list to go. Northern Africa is kind of the next on my list.
Okay.
Southwest Asia, my dad's family is Japanese. He was born in Japan, and moved to California when he was like 6 months old, and it was a naturalized U.S. citizen. And so I've also always wanted to travel to Asia, Japan in particular, but with Peace Corps it would be,
it wouldn't be
Thailand or
Yeah.
Laos or but Southwest Asia. I think that those are also similar reasons to Northern Africa, that just the history and the culture and kind of being in that area of the world.
Were you telling the recruiter all this?
A little bit. So at the time when you submitted your application, a Peace Corps recruiter would call and kind of go over your application. And
How long did that take, by the way?
From the time you submitted your application to the time you were selected was about a year.
Okay.
And I knew it was about a year, which was another reason why I thought, what can I, after I graduated, after I finished my master's, I was like, what can I want to go to Peace Corps. What can I do? I want to work in nonprofits. I want to go to Peace Corps. What can I do that is not going to be like get a job and then quit in 6 months? So I was like, AmeriCorps Vista is 12 months. It's a 12-month term of service. I can I can serve in a nonprofit. I can use my education, my MBA, all my things, marketing, and all the things I just was studying. Get some experience in a nonprofit, and it's only a 12-month commitment. So I can plan my Peace Corps service for. It's going to take me a year to apply anyway. I'll plan everything, and so it'll work out right after I finish it.
Well, that's wonderful.
So like I said, I kind of planned maybe 2 steps. I was like, okay, well, I need about a year. I need to work. I need to do something. What can I do? And so AmeriCorps Vista helped me get experience in nonprofits that I could use later. It allowed me to, live and serve, and I earned my living allowance and pay bills for the 12 months. I, was able to fill out all my Peace Corps applications, and then my 12-month term of service was up. And
did you enjoy it?
I did. I enjoyed it a lot. My Vista service was. It's hard to say now whether or not my Vista service. I did 1 year of Vista and then Peace Corps, and then later on I did another year of AmeriCorps Vista as a Vista leader. And so I think my Vista service helped me, like, with that service mentality and kind of all of the things helped me shape the kind of things I wanted to do. And then Peace Corps helped with you've got limited resources to do everything. All the things you want to do. You're going to have to make do with what you have. And not only that, but, we can talk about it, but the goals of Peace Corps I still use a lot.
Yeah.
And then that helped me when I did my second term of service. And now I still, like I said, I still kind of keep those service minds in line. But I enjoyed it. It was the first time I'd written, my Vista service was the first time I'd written a grant. It was the first time I managed trainings. It was, the first time I, got donations from a business. And, there was a lot of things that I did.
Do you think you made a real difference in some people's lives?
I do.
This time?
I think that my Vista service, I definitely made a difference. Peace Corps for sure. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, well, let's just stick with AmeriCorps Vista right now.
Yeah, for my first Vista service, I mostly did trainings with our Corps of AmeriCorps state and national members that work directly with kids. Vista is a indirect service, so it's capacity building. So the organization I was brand new; it was just opening. So I helped create a lot of forms and practices. I did newsletters to help keep the parents and the families of the kids we worked with up to date. Like I said, I wrote grants and got donations for books and all sorts of things. So
what kind of kids are you talking about?
They were early Head Start. So the kids that they work with primarily have been identified by their teachers through assessments for being behind in like social emotional development or school readiness, reading, you know, social skills, those types of things. So the state national members that they had would pair one-on-one with one of these children in the teams of 10. So there were like 10 AmeriCorps members, 10 kids at an early Head Start classroom. And so those members would work one-on-one with those kids to help them develop those skills and read with them and, you know, kind of have that positive role. And then my role was to support them. So if they wanted to get books for their classroom, how can I help get those books? I did I did grant writing, and I helped with the trainings for the members. So everything from, okay, we need communication skills, and how do you deal with difficult situations, or all of these types of things. Those were the things that I did at my first year as Vista.
All right, so that sounds like it was a tremendous year for you in preparation for living abroad for 2 years.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course at the time, AmeriCorps Vista, you didn't have a really huge living allowance. I think at the time I was living like $600 a month or something in Texas at the time.
That was your salary?
That was what I took home. Yeah, after taxes, I think I lived on an apartment. It was cost like $250 a month at the time. Like you were definitely living the, you know, it's an anti-poverty program, and they want you to live at the level of those in which you serve.
Sure.
So I think I was definitely at
were.
that level. So, but then when I went to Peace Corps, you know, you still get a living allowance, and I never felt like I wasn't able to do things, was struggling when I was there.
Well then, after a year, you'd already had your interview with the recruiter. Was that like a 1-hour interview?
It was maybe about an hour. He kind of called and said, okay, here's when we have teams leaving. Here's the openings. So our next cohort of volunteers are going to go. So like, for example, I think I ended up going to Ukraine. They said, okay, well, we're having a team in Eastern Europe. I don't know if he told me it was Ukraine at the time. I don't think so. He's like, our next Eastern European cohorts will be leaving in March, for example. And he kind of said, so we have, those are going to be, I was a business development volunteer. So they were like TEFL, teachers of English, foreign language, TEFL volunteers, community youth volunteers, I think, was like a new thing that was either with my group or the group after me, but business development was relatively new. And so he was kind of saying, well, so it's going to be a business development group. They'll be going to Eastern Europe probably in March, and that this time this was maybe September. So September of 2003, we were maybe doing our interviews. And then there was also I think a group going to Northern Africa. They were health volunteers going around the same time. And those were the next group of members that were going. So the interview was a little bit, what do I want to go? Do I have a preference in these two? And
not only where you want to go, but when you
wanted to go.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I don't really have a lot of health experience. I mean, of course, they were like, well, you'll have training. But I was like, I don't really have a lot. I have studied business. I think the business development volunteers would be a better fit. And Eastern Europe was my number one choice. So if I have a preference, I would prefer business development volunteer in Eastern Europe.
And it was leaving at that cohort
was leaving within a right amount of time, yeah. I was like, I definitely would be available by then, that will work out. I didn't want it to be too long, too far out, because then I was like,
so when you told them that, you gave them that answer, did you assume right then that you would be going?
No, not really. They kind of made a mention that the recruiters would make a recommendation, but they wouldn't guarantee you that whatever the recruiter recommended is what you would get. So I still didn't really know where I would go.
You know, I think some people at that point, might have said, I want to tell this recruiter what I want. You've got a place for me, you've got the location for me, and he'll make a recommendation.
Yeah.
Come on, I want him to recommend me.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think some candidates, we'll call them candidates, some candidates were very specific about where they wanted to go. I don't know if they were always selected.
Yeah.
Just because I do think that one of the things that I don't know if I got it out of the application materials, but one of the things I think helped me was I was flexible in wanting to go. Like, I felt like I definitely had a preference, but I would go anywhere. I would go wherever they sent me
That
to
was
go.
the main thing in the back of your mind. I will go anywhere. Tell me.
Just tell me where we're going. Any place is going to be new. You'll be an adventure. At the time it was what.
And
go where you're needed, kind of.
You
a
would
stuff.
assume that they picked up on that.
Yeah, I do think so. I do remember them asking, is there anything you don't want? And I was like, well, I don't like being cold. And he's like, Eastern Europe's going to be cold.
Yeah, it is.
And I was like, yeah, I'll get over it. I'll get over it. But, that was really the only thing I had that I didn't want to, that was the only thing. Other than that, I was like, I don't know how comfortable I'd be with the health volunteer. I don't know if that's really my thing. I think I was definitely leaning towards the other. I do think I was lucky that I got exactly my top choice of things I wanted to go. I did serve with other volunteers that were like, I wanted to be a health volunteer in Northern Africa. I am a TEFL volunteer in Eastern Europe. That is not what I was hoping to do. But but it, I think it.
So did they
experience.
Call you on the phone or write you or what?
I received essentially a welcome packet. It was this package, and I kind of wish I'd kept all of the materials that came in it, but it was essentially a packet that says, congratulations, you've been selected to serve, welcome to Peace Corps. Here's your assignment, and it kind of gave a brief overview of the country you would be placed at, and you're going to be a business development volunteer in Ukraine, serving in, leaving in March, and it just had like a little package. But you had 10 days from the time you received that packet to contact Peace Corps and accept the role. If you chose not to accept it, you would then essentially be put on a second round, and you may or may not get another placement.
And you understood that?
Yeah, you understood that. It was very clear that if you turned it down, you may or may not get another placement.
Okay.
And so I was like, yes, please, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, sign me up. And from then it was a matter of filling all of your things out, any of the other things you needed to do prior to service.
Was it a long series of stuff that you had to fill out?
No, not really. I'm trying to remember now whether or not the medical screenings came before or after that step.
Yeah.
I think they came before, but then there was still you did your initial medical screenings, and then there was still some follow-up that happened, in advance of all of that. I remember doing my medical screenings. Peace Corps allows, there's an agreement with the Department of Veterans Affairs to allow you to do your health screenings at a VA hospital.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so obviously I was a Vista volunteer. We did not have comprehensive health insurance.
Yeah.
So I did all of my screenings, and I just remember the folks at the VA hospital being very confused. But they were like, there's statutes, it says right here, okay, I'll do it. He didn't sure what it was for. The same thing when I went to get all my fingerprints done for my application, the sheriff's department was also very confused as to why, please fingerprint me. They were not sure. So it was, East Texas is not a place where a lot of AmeriCorps volunteers tend to come from, I don't think. So a lot of them didn't know what I was trying to do at the time. But by the time I got my packet, I had finished my Vista service. I think it was December before I left that I'd gotten my welcome packet. And like I said, I had 10 days. And from then it was filling out the documents for your passport. And, you know, I think we had, I think they sent us like your first conversation. So with some basic phrases, you know, hello, how are you? You know, my name is, I'm an American, you know, those things,
Yeah.
Basic conversations. And I think they sent us a little cassette, an audio cassette that you could practice with and hear some of these phrases at some point. And there was like a little, basic information about the country, a little bit about your assignment, like what a business development volunteer would do.
Did they tell you exactly where you would be?
No.
Okay.
No, we just
That's
knew
later.
we were going to Ukraine and we were leaving.
Did you
in
know
March.
how many of you would be going?
No, I did not know. So we were assigned, we were group 26. We knew we were group 26. So if that tells you how many groups had gone, I don't know.
I doubt it.
How-
That means 25 would have gone before
For
you went.
me.
And
So
that's impossible.
there's 20, so I don't know how many groups they send per year, but if
Maybe
that
they
could,
send several.
several groups, but I
Yeah.
mean, this was 2004, so even if they send 2 groups a year, that can kind of tell you they've been maybe having volunteers for about 10 years or so,
Okay.
which kind of lines out with being, you know, late 90s or whatever, when the first groups send. So we went to, the first time we did get like a contact information for some other members. I do remember prior to us all meeting, we created like a Yahoo group. I mean, this is 2004, so there was like, I don't think Facebook or any of the social media platforms, none of those existed.
Before we get to that, when you're all getting together, tell me how your family and friends responded to you now going into the Peace
Going
Corps.
into the Peace Corps. Well,
And you'd be gone for 2 years.
my mom thought it was an exciting adventure. She was all for me going and was like, this is going to be so exciting. I think my sister, maybe my brother, one of them was like, have you looked at where this place is on a map? Like, they had to look it up. We had to look it up, you know. Have you seen where this place is on a map? Do you know where you're going? This is, you know, I think central Ukraine is on the same parallel as like northern Michigan. So it can get,
It is cold.
kind of cold.
Yeah.
Most of them were like, this sounds absolutely like something you would do. Are you sure you want to go here? Others in my family are not as keen on travel as I was like, I want to travel. I want to go places. And they were like, 2 hours is as far as I'm going. You know, so...
Did any of them say anything to you like, so you'll be gone for 2 years, we won't see you for 2 years? Don't you think that's kind of selfish on your part?
No, not really.
Good.
No, my family was all really supportive. My friends were all really supportive. I had some friends some folks I was working with at the time that were from Romania and Russia and some of them, and so were like, oh, here's some tips you'll want to have when you're over there. And so most people were really supportive. There was a little bit of you're going to this place. Like I remember before I left, they kind of gave me all these gifts that they thought I would need, you know, but some of them were really like, I have like a Bola bag that is like for water, like a bunch of stuff that it was more jokes, you know, of you're gonna be out in nowhere. Some of them came in really, I was like, man, I kind of wish I had more of whatever that was that you gave me, because it was actually useful. And some of it was just really, you're heading to, have you looked at this place? Yeah, like a joke, you know, where you're going.
Now let's go back to you and your friends are about to leave.
Yeah, so before we left, we formed like a Yahoo group, and so people were asking like, what you're packing, what are you taking, you know, kind of stuff. And we met for staging in March in
What's
Washington,
that
D.C.
mean,
So
staging?
staging is like a time, and I don't know if they do now, but staging is like a 3-day, I think it was 3 days, that where they pulled the entire group that was leaving all together, and you essentially it was like your last opportunity to kind of say, this is not for me. But it also was where we learned, we got our passports during staging. They had you filled out your passport information. Instead of them coming to you, they went to Peace so they could get all your visas included and everything, and so they had all of your passport books and all of that. You did all of, you kind of found out who, like, you kind of got to, it was the first time you got to meet everybody that was going. That was the first time we knew there was going to be about 65 of us. In
65 in the staging.
In the staging.
Okay, and they were from, I assume, all over.
All over, yeah. California, and I know there's some from Florida. I think some from Michigan. But it's one of those things where you kind of, like, I remember them doing this thing where, like, how many of you, like, sold your home to be here, and how many of you quit your job to be here, and how many of you, sold your car to be here, all of these. So people, I think the oldest member in our group was mid-80s.
Wow.
He was the
Mid-80s?
oldest. Mid-80s. I want to say it's like 86 at the time. And I think the youngest in our group was in their early 20s. And so we had a wide range. I mean, there were folks that were like big money fundraisers that like raised money for like nationwide charities, and people that worked in Hollywood, and we had folks that had run their own business. A lot of former AmeriCorps volunteers were there.
Anybody who'd been in Peace Corps before?
Not in our group that I can remember. Not in our group that I can remember.
Okay.
It's possible.
But I'm just very curious. Did that 86-year-old go?
Yeah, he did.
He did?
He did. He served, he was actually in my language group, and wonderful. I don't know if he finished the whole term. I think he was ended up at a site that was like very physically demanding, and I think he ended up, I don't know if we
coming home early.
I think he ended up coming home early, but he loved it there. Yeah, he loved it. There was a woman who was serving in the group before me. I think she was in group 25, and it was her 4th term of Peace Corps service.
Wow.
She had served in the 60s, and then I think again in the 70s or 80s, and then again in like the 80s or 90s, and then was serving again. So she had served
Wow,
quite a
that's
few
amazing.
times.
I've never heard of anybody like that.
Yeah.
4?
4. It was her 4th
Wow.
term, 4th time serving. So yeah. But it was great. And then from staging.
Where was this staging?
It was in
by the way?
Washington, D.C. It was in Washington, D.C. And we got to, there was like all the Peace Corps rules and all of the things you'll need to know. A little bit about what to expect when you first get in. Like, we were business development volunteers, so they were like, you're gonna want to meet with some folks, so they were asking us to try to plan to be more business casual when we arrived.
Yeah.
So I remember a lot of people taking clothes and changing on the plane as we were getting ready to land, and showing up because we once we flew to Ukraine, we arrived at Waterspit Airport, and then we took, I think they chartered us a bus. I think we were all on a bus.
So at this staging, you knew that you were either going to fly home, and that would be the end of that, or you were going to fly to
You were getting on a
Ukraine.
plane, and you were going to Ukraine.
You weren't going home
You
for
weren't
a
going home.
last visit.
No, yeah. Once we were there, we took everything. I think we could take 100. I think we'd take 2 bags. I think there could be 50 kilos a piece or something like that. We could take 2 bags. And I do remember them telling us, you need to be able to carry your 2 bags on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not always stairs and everything. You need to be able to manage these.
Was there a charter flight for all of you?
No, we flew commercial. We were definitely on commercial. I think I helped manage the passports and handing everyone's passports as we went, collecting them and holding them, passing them out to everyone as when we got to the airport. And we flew as a group, and then their people from Peace Corps met us at the airport, and then Peace Corps shuttled us to essentially I want to say it was a college. It was some kind, I think we were in dorms, some college in Kiev for the first 3 days. We were there. And it was during those first 3 days that we were assigned our language groups. And we learned where our language group was going to be and what language we were studying.
So, give us an idea of the number and maybe variety of languages in the Ukraine.
So there's the primary language is Ukrainian. That's the national language, and it is the language of business and government. At the time in eastern Ukraine, the primary language that was spoken was Russian, and in western Ukraine you spoke Ukrainian, and in the central portion of the country there is a blend. We called it, well, I was told it was called Surgic, which is essentially a Russian-Ukrainian mix where you might use Russian and Ukrainian words interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
You might pronounce Ukrainian words like they're Russian words like they're Ukrainian. But it's not a strict Russian or Ukrainian, like the classical. It's a blend.
That's interesting. I would have thought that there would be quite a significant number of people who would say, no, we're not speaking Russian. We're speaking.
Yeah, in eastern Ukraine, there's still, especially in down near Crimea and Odessa and kind of in the portions of Ukraine that bordered Russia, that just was historically the kind of language, the language that is primary. So if you were going to serve in eastern Ukraine, a lot of the folks that served in eastern Ukraine learned Russian as their primary language.
Because that's what everybody spoke.
And then if you served in western Ukraine, you would primarily learn Ukrainian, because that's what everybody spoke, except for Uzhgorod, which they primarily will speak a Russian, but they actually speak this. It's on the border with Hungary, so they have like a Ukrainian-Hungarian kind of hybrid.
Yeah.
At least that's how I understand. I didn't serve there, but from the volunteers that did, that's what I understand. Is that it's like a dialect. The same thing with the Carpathians and Ivano-Frankivsk. There's like a dialect there that it's not a strict classical.
But if you know one, you don't know them all.
You don't know them all. Yeah. So if you went there and you were visiting. There's some places, it'd be a little bit like here in the United States, where there are some places where the words they use, where you could carry on a conversation and you'd be fine, but you're like, I'm not really 100% sure what that person said.
Yeah. Sure, I know.
So it's a little bit like that. But so we were broken up into our language groups during staging. We were assigned our language instructors, our language and cross-cultural coordinators.
Who would be going with you?
They were host country nationals who would be teaching us. They were mostly living already in the villages that we would be going to. So for the first...
So you didn't meet those people in Washington. We met
them when we arrived in country.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So it's kind of our first introduction. The staging was kind of yet again, we caught a little bit more of like an overview of language and culture, like here's some things you should know. We were broken up into our language groups. We were told what language, we got to learn what language we were studying and where we were going and who else was in our groups. I think they cut up little postcards. And you had to put your postcard together like a puzzle, and when you got it all together, that was your
There it
whole,
was.
that was your
Wow.
group that was learning, studying with you, that you were going to be learning your language with. And then you were given a, like you put a pin, you know, kind of, here's where you're going to go, and everyone went up to a map and put pins where
Yeah.
they were going to be learning. And so I did my language study in a village outside of Kiev called Barashivka. And for the first 3 months, were in training.
So what are you speaking there?
I learned Ukrainian. So we did our staging. We got to country, and we had kind of 3 days of prep. We learned where we were gonna go to our language learning group. So this was the first 3 months where we were staging. And for 3 months, we were working with a language and cross-cultural coordinator. We had lessons at her apartment, and she taught us. We have language materials, so we were learning language. Like, for example, when we got to like the eating out and whatever, we went to like a cafe and had lunch, and then we all had to order our own food and things like that.
Wow.
And we lived with host families for the first 3 months that we were there. So
Did you live with a host family?
I did.
Yeah.
I lived
Just you, not another volunteer.
Just me.
You. Okay.
Yeah, I do remember. So there was a lot of questions of the host family. They had hosted volunteers before. I think I don't think the previous volunteer. I remember them asking me whether or not I was vegetarian. When I arrived, and like our volunteer, the one that was here before, she didn't eat meat, and it was very hard to cook for her. This is what they're telling me.
Oh yeah.
So my host family, they had there was mother, father, and then they had a older son and an older daughter that were both at university, and then a younger daughter who was about, I want to say she was maybe 8 at the time, 10. She was in like 8th form. She was probably 12. And she lived at home, but she spoke the most English, so she was like my little mini translator.
Oh.
Alina was my
She
mini
spoke
translator.
English?
She spoke some English. No one else. The older kids, when they were home, Tanya and Andre could speak English, but Alina could speak some English because she was learning it in school. But the parents didn't speak any English. So Alina was my translator. She helped me out a lot, trying to make sure I understood everything. Yeah, no, it was wonderful. And there was...
Did you feel like you had a facility for language?
I thought so. Going in, I thought I did well. Like, I thought I could pick up languages pretty well, and catch on to like the dialects and the rhythm of the speaking and all of that. There are some parts of Ukrainian I find really hard. Some of it I felt like I could understand and I can catch on. Since Ukrainian is Cyrillic, one of the things I did learn is that there's not really spelling in Ukrainian. So if you can know how the letters sound, you can pretty much sound out any word. So if I was reading something or needed to know what a word was, if I could write it down, I could then, obviously I could hand it to someone and be like, what does this mean? But I could practice enough to be where I could try to sound it out and break it up into syllables and sound it out.
Well, let me ask you this. Was there anybody in these early days when you were there who said to you, either directly or indirectly, hey, don't sweat the language. It's not a big deal. Most people around here know enough English, and you know enough. You'll learn enough. You'll get by. Don't make a big deal out of it.
Not necessarily like that. I do remember, I think it was our language and cross-cultural coordinator. But this was one thing that I do remember, and it's something that I remind myself if I'm trying to learn a language or trying to speak a foreign language now, I was like, first of all, you have the vocabulary of a 5-year-old at the time. That's the level you're at, is the vocabulary of a 5-year-old. Most people are going to understand you're not. Fortunately, Ukraine is one of those countries where just trying to speak, especially Ukrainian, trying to speak, having an American or a foreigner use their language, they're happy to hear that you're learning it and you're trying to speak it. So they're very forgiving.
And they encourage you.
And they encourage it, yes. But also the one thing I do remember is you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be understood.
Yes. So
there was a lot of emphasis on don't try to get every word correct. Try to be understood. And that's all you need to do. It doesn't have to be correct.
But you have to work hard to get to that level, don't you?
You do, but you can also, use the words you know to try to convey the thing you want. So, you might not know all the words you want to say. One example I use is there's the word and I will never pronounce it correctly, but there's a word in Ukrainian that's like if you wanted to say you were hungry. I cannot. There's hungry and cold sound very similar in Ukrainian. They're spelled only, like there's a single letter difference in these two words. And they sound very much alike. And I forever would get it wrong. Like I would pronounce it correctly. So instead of saying I was hungry, I would always say I am cold. So so I started just not using that word and just be like, oh, I'd like something to eat. I can say all those words. So it maybe isn't the most conversational of ways to say it, but
it works.
It works.
Yeah.
I got what I needed. I also, conversationally, you don't have to have perfect grammar. You don't need to go to the train station and say, I would like to buy a ticket to wherever. They know when you go to the train station, you're trying to buy tickets.
That's what you're there for.
All you need to say is the city you want to go to. You don't need to be perfect.
Right. Absolutely. And you learned that, seems like, kind of early on.
Yeah, I think so. I do remember, and this is a story I've told quite a few times, but I do remember when I was with my host family, there was one time I was trying to ask here in the United States, like cookies, for example, like I know there's metric systems in Ukraine, so you're going to buy a kilo of flour, or a kilo of meat, or you have 500 grams of something. Okay, I know how much 1 kilo, 2.2 pounds.
Yep. I
know if I'm going to ask for a kilo of flour, I know about how much flour I'm going to get. It comes in 5 pounds. I can picture that in my head.
Sure.
But if I wanted to buy something like cookies, here in the States, you would just go buy yourself a package of Oreos.
Sure.
You don't often look at how many grams of Oreos you are buying.
No, I have never done that.
So, if I wanted to buy the equivalent of a package of Oreos, I was like, how many grams? What would I ask for? So I remember asking my host family this question, and she had brought home like a little bag of ginger snaps or something, and I was like, what do you ask for? And they're like, I know the word for cookies, Petio's word for cookies. I can go and I can ask for cookies, but how do I know how many cookies I'm getting? And I was trying to ask my host mother this, and she was not getting it, and Alina was trying to. Apparently what came out later is I came to language class the next day, and my language instructor was like, your host mother called and said you don't like the food they're giving you? And I was like, what? She said something about you not liking the cookies or something, and I was like, no. So then I had to explain it to my language instructor that it's not that. That's not what I was trying to do. I was like, if I went to the store and I wanted to buy like a
bag of cookies. Like, how many? Like, I don't know what 200 grams of cookies looks like.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, okay, well, I will clear it up with your host mother and explain. And she's like, but all you have to do is go to the store and just ask them to show you. And I was like, okay, I know the words for show me, please. And so and then you'll know. They tell her to stop when you're done and look how many grams it is, and then you'll know. And I was like, I can do that.
So did you stay with the host family just for 3 months?
3 months.
And then what happened?
So midway through the 3-month training, we had...
Oh, this is called a training period.
Yeah, this is our 3-month training.
Okay.
So midway through that, we came back into Kiev. I don't forget exactly what they called it, but this was the time we learned where our permanent stations will be, what cities we were going to, and we met our host country counterpart, our in-country representative that was sort of our point of contact.
In-country representative working for Peace Corps?
No, they were working for whatever your agency was. It was essentially
Okay.
like your site supervisor, but we called it a host country counterpart. And they were essentially your supervisor at your site. So if you had any issues or whatever, you would communicate. They would approve leave, or if you wanted to be away from site or whatever it is. So we found all of that out in the middle of this training period. And then at the end of training, that's when we did our swearing in. We were officially Peace Corps volunteers, and our 2 years started.
Did anybody leave?
I don't remember. I don't think anyone left, and we did have a couple that went home at staging. But I don't think anyone left during training.
Okay.
And so once we finished our language training, we also did an LPI, a language proficiency interview, to see how well our language was. I think at the end of my 3 month, I think my first language assessment was at a intermediate low, so not a little bit above a novice level of speaking Ukrainian.
Did you have a goal at that point?
No.
So here I am now, and I want to be up here.
No, I really kind of was hoping I could get to fluency before I left Ukraine. I don't know that I ever quite got to fluency. I think by the time I left, I think I was at an intermediate high, which is just below fluency.
But you kept learning the whole time you
Yeah,
were
we
there.
kept learning. Well, so once we finished our formal training and we swore in, we were then like, okay, now you're going to your cities for your permanent, where your sites are. I was stationed in Chervonograd, which is a city just south of Lviv in western Ukraine. So I was in far western Ukraine.
Spell the name of your city for us.
Oh goodness, Chervonograd. It's Chervon Hard, Chervonograd. And that's in the English spelling of it. I'd have to write it down. I have some things on how it's spelled in Ukrainian. City, maybe about 100,000 people. They had Peace Corps volunteers. I think the last Peace Corps volunteer they had left like 2 years before me. So they had Peace Corps volunteers previously. But I was the only American in the city.
When you were there?
Yes, when I was there. I was the only one stationed there.
And what was your living? Were you living with a family, or were you living on your own?
Yeah, so for the first 3 months at our station, we had another host family. So I stayed with a host family. There was just like I want to say mother, father. There was, and then a little boy's name, Taras was his name. He was maybe 6 or 7. And I stayed with them for 3 months. Until, and then after that I moved into my own apartment. So I had kind of like a studio apartment.
In the same city?
In the same city, yep. Not far away from my host family's place. So our host families kind of helped us acclimate.
Yeah.
And then our host country counterparts like coordinated our housing and got us apartments and all of that.
So you didn't have to worry about buying furniture and
No,
all
yeah, it
that.
all came furnished. Everything was furnished. Every so often, my landlord would come by and ask for money. You know, we'd pay like a utility or something. I think one time he came by to fix something. I just remember having to get my host country counterpart on the phone because it was like, I understand he wants to fix something, but I have no idea what he's trying to fix. And so I called him and was like, you're gonna have to talk to this person. But for the most part, we had to set up our host families and our host country counterparts helped us set up our bank account, and we had to get a post office box.
Yeah.
You know, all of that stuff that you would do. So that.
So you knew then where you were going to be working, and what you were going to do, and what they expected you to do.
I'd say we knew the organization we were going to be with, and where we were going to live, and what we were supposed to do and what was expected of us is a whole another conversation. Some of the volunteers had very clearly defined they were serving with universities or serving with large. The nonprofit I was serving with, I'm not sure exactly what they were really wanting
From you?
from me.
Oh my.
I remember kind of the first few weeks I was there, at least the first week and a half I was there, I showed up, they were like, here you are, I got to meet all the people that was there, and I would show up at like 9 a.m. in my like business attire, you know, like business casual kind of dress clothes, because I was a business volunteer, and I showed up at 9 a.m. and like, people might have been there, might not have been there, might be meeting someplace else that day, you know. So it was very like, I'm gonna go here. I ended up doing a lot of I did some grant translation because most
The nonprofit was writing grants.
then either the nonprofit was writing grants or other like sister nonprofits or other organizations that they work with were writing grants. And of course, if you wanted to submit a grant internationally, it has to be in English.
Has to be in English, you
It has
said?
to be in English
Okay.
to submit it. You know, if you wanted to submit it to like a international nonprofit or international NGO or whatever, you have to submit a version in English. So they would have it written in Ukrainian or something, and I would help translate some of those.
That
So
must have been kind of tough at times.
it was at times challenging because, of course, my
You have to be exact when you're
intermediate,
writing
low
grants.
language level, you know, so there was a lot of looking stuff up. There wasn't really Google Translate at the time. Like, that was not a thing that you could really access. Plus, there's not, or not a lot of technology in Ukraine at this time. But so I did do some of that. I did help with a lot of translations while I was there. About, say 6 months maybe into my, it might have been 6 months, 3 months or something into my service, my host country counterpart connected me with the English school number 8, which was a specialized English school, which means that all of their students were learning English. The students had a higher level of English knowledge. And they asked me to come and work with the school. They had a school-run English, like a school newspaper that they would put together in English. And so I started out helping out with their school paper.
To help them improve their English.
Yes, essentially I was helping them with English. So
So wait a minute. There's something that I don't understand here. You're working for a nonprofit and you're writing grants, and now you're working for a school to help them improve their English.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, like I said, my host country counterpart knew some folks at this specialized English school, and essentially what it was is there was a question as to whether or not I had enough work at my host agency. And so like what other things would be useful or helpful. So I started going and helping out at the after school with some English. Helping work. Essentially, it was like a club. It was a group of students that put together this newspaper, and I essentially helped make sure their English was correct in the paper, and work with them. I ended up. I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting with my Peace Corps service is I was a business development volunteer, but the business development positions were new, so it was. Some students were at university teaching university classes, and some were helping with, full business development. Some were doing somewhere in between. But a lot of times, and I don't know how other people's Peace Corps experience worked, but a lot of times what we found was volunteers would take on what we call secondary projects. And sometimes your secondary project became your main project.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that is a little bit what happened with me. My secondary projects became my primary projects. So
did anybody in the Peace Corps suggest this to you, or talk to you about, well, this isn't working out quite as well as we expected, so why don't we try this? Or was this all Ukrainians?
Some of it was, we had a regional administrator, so the person that was he was our regional director that kind of oversaw was our Peace Corps staff member that worked with the host country counterparts to kind of coordinate the work.
Yeah.
Or if we needed something and we thought we needed it and we couldn't get it from our host country, Peace Corps, we could get it.
Mm-hmm.
So, to some extent, it was this is something that's common, that we've seen, like during our training in those first 3 days in Peace Corps and some of that, a lot of times volunteers will find these secondary projects or these things that that the members are passionate about.
Yeah.
That is not necessarily your assignment, and sometimes they kind of become the main thing that you're doing within your
But you have to
community.
get Peace Corps' approval to do this, don't you?
I think if you officially switch your service station, then yes. I never officially changed my service station.
What does that mean, station? What is it? Are you talking about a place? Or are you talking about something else?
Sometimes it's a place and sometimes it's an organization. So I served with the NGO Plejada. Was my site, my service location. That was where I was serving. My city was Chevaronrad. So you might stay in Chevaronrad or Ivano-Frankivsk or wherever it was you were, but you may not be serving anymore with NGO Plejada. You may now be primarily school number 8, and they'd assign you a new host country counterpart that would be part of the school and whatever.
So how did you feel about this change yourself? How did you yourself feel?
I actually enjoyed it. So one of the things I ended up doing is NGO Plata, they asked if I would do some English clubs. And I was like, absolutely, let's do them. So we were doing English clubs with NGO Plejada. I was coming and they would have evening English classes with kids and Saturday English clubs. And they were a little more, some formal, some informal. And then when I was with school number 8, I started doing an English club and it's kind of like a leadership club at the school. And so I started off, my main thing was these English clubs where the students could then practice their English and we kind of exchanged culturally different things, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Was learning English in the Ukraine seen as a way to advance yourself? And if you didn't do it, then you're going to hit a glass ceiling somewhere?
Well, all the students, you took English and you took one additional foreign language. Usually the additional foreign language was assigned to you. It was usually either French or German. And you the school chose, your parents chose, someone chose for you, but everybody learned English. Now, once you got everybody learned English, studied English.
Why do you think that was?
Well, because English which still is, like, the language of international commerce.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were going to do business in any way, they had to have at least a basic level of English.
Yeah.
Now, some people, depending on what they did in college or the jobs they took, much like learning a foreign language in the United States, you might learn really well, but then if you don't go into a role where you have to use it all the time, a lot of the adults, their English was not as strong as the students.
Sure.
Because the students were learning it every day and using it all the time, and parents probably hadn't studied it since school. So, and it also depended on where you were. You know, in Kiev and the central cities, you could find more people that spoke English. Now it's probably significantly higher, the number of people that
So you knew at the time that you're helping them to improve their English was a really big deal.
Yeah,
for them.
yes, and they wanted to learn. They wanted to learn. They wanted to, you know. I remember there were some students that were like they wanted to be a journalist or something. But of course, this is one of the things that we did during my language training. We had like a resume writing workshop, like a job, because obviously we're business volunteers. So we did like a job skills kind of a training for people in the village that we were in. And I remember one person saying they wanted to be a journalist, but their parents wanted them to be a teacher or doctor or something. And I was like, it's what I want to be a journalist. And so they wanted to, and you know, if they wanted to be a journalist, they're going to need English. You know, they're going to need it. So it was just something that a lot of them wanted to practice, and they wanted their English to be better. And it was helpful for me, you know, to learn, because a lot of times we would have things where I would have to be able to, you know those Ukrainian words to be able to help them understand what they're asking me. So it helped my language too at the time.
Yeah. So it was meeting their needs and your needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you wake up every day thinking, well, I can't wait to get back to continue what I was just doing? It's so much fun.
Well, sometimes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I mean, so I do remember there was one time during language, when we were doing the training, I was walking from my host family's house to my language class, and you know, I'm walking, and I just stopped, and I had this thought, and this was maybe a couple weeks into being into Ukraine, and I just had this thought. I was like, how am I going to pay for this trip when I get home? Like, that was like, you know, how, and then I had to remember, like, this isn't a trip, I'm here for 2 more years.
Yeah.
I'm here for a long time. Like, it's not a vacation I have to pay for. But it felt like that. I mean, it kind of felt like,
oh, that's great.
I was enjoying it in a way that you would not think of work.
Right.
And most of the time, I really enjoyed being in Ukraine. I will say, you know, told my recruiter I didn't like the cold. And let me tell you what, I think the first winter I was in Ukraine, it was the coldest winter they had in forever. I mean, it was like negative 40 degrees.
Oh, where you were?
So, yes, it was so
Lord.
cold.
I can't even imagine that.
It was so cold. This is when I learned that negative 40 is the same in Fahrenheit and Celsius. And I was like, it was so cold. And of course, as it thaws, they don't really, you know, they didn't really like clean the streets or whatever. So there was a lot of, and during the spring, there's a lot of melting and then refreezing, overnight melting. And so
So it's a mess for quite a while.
Step on and fall through ankle deep of ice water, and like I felt like my shoes and all my socks were wet for 3 months straight. Like, it was a lot of that, and I was just like, what am I doing here? But then you'd get to go hang out with the kids that you were working with, or you'd meet your other Peace Corps volunteers or folks in your town or your village.
Did you go on vacations with other Peace Corps volunteers?
We did. I did go a couple of times. I didn't travel away from my city as much as I think other volunteers did. But I did go into Poland. We, myself and a couple other volunteers from, they I think one served in Kharkiv, and I think another one served in Kherson maybe, but they were from they were serving in Eastern Ukraine, and I remember they primarily had learned Russian.
Mm-hmm.
And we had made a trip into Poland. So, and at the time, it was not a simple task to get in and out of Ukraine. Like we had multi-entry visas, so we could come and go. But Ukraine is, former Soviet at the time. Like the train trackways were different. Like so you couldn't just take a train directly in and out. Outside of, into Poland and into what was Western Europe, the train tracks were different sizes, like literally.
Wow.
So you couldn't just hop on a train and go to Warsaw at the time. So I remember it being like, okay, well I think we were going the day after Christmas one year, and so we had come into Lviv, and one of the gentlemen I had studied with, he lived in Lviv. His site was in Lviv, and so a bunch of us kind of stayed at his apartment overnight, and then the three of us, the three volunteers, we essentially got on this marshrutka, which is like a little minibus, little van, and took a marshrutka to the border, and then we walked across the border. It's the day after Christmas. There's nobody there. We walked across the border, and then took another little bus to a train that took us from this little village in Poland into Krakow, and then from Krakow, we stayed in Krakow mostly, and then we stayed there for 2 or 3 days and did some excursions in and around Krakow.
You have a good time?
It was we had a wonderful time. And spoken Ukrainian and spoken Polish is very similar. Written Ukrainian and written Polish is very different, but spoken Ukrainian and spoken Polish is very similar. So
you could get by.
I could get by. I used my Ukrainian, and I swear they just thought I was speaking really bad Polish. But I could get by, and I could answer stuff, and I could kind of sound. I was like, this is rivals. This is like, how do you know? I was like, well, if I sounded it out like I thought it would sound in Ukrainian, that's the word it would translate to. So I was able to kind of get by in Poland, and of course in Poland there was more people that spoke English, and you could do that. So, and then I think we ended up taking a bus back from Krakow directly into Lviv, which was like an overnight bus, and it was one of those things where it was the first time I had leaving, and they came onto the bus and like collected everyone's passports, and then you like drove to the other side of the border, and then they brought them all back on board, and I was like, we're driving away without our passports. Like it was really, it was a little bit nerve-wracking, but it was a wonderful trip. And then I did visit other volunteers in Ukraine. I think I spent Ukrainian Independence Day with some volunteers in Odessa once, and I visited some friends in Sevastopol, which is in Crimea, and
Are these people and you pretty close? These Peace Corps volunteers?
Yeah, I would say some of them we were close with. Some of them I'd done my language training with. I think the Sevastopol trip, I'm trying to remember what. I think we were meeting a group. There was a specific reason we were coming to Sevastopol. Like I think we were all working on a project together, if I remember correctly. And so there was like 10 or something of us that had all met up in Sevastopol, and of course I took a train, and from Kiev to Sevastopol is like a 24-hour train ride. It's like you're in the train for a whole day.
24-hour train.
It's like a 24-hour train ride. And I think I took third-class cars, and like, are you serious? I was like, yeah, I just took a third-class car, and so it was a long trip, but. So yeah, I got pretty good at the trains.
Were you, have you stayed friends with some of the volunteers you knew then?
Yeah, we stayed friends over the years. We've connected. I think our group recently, we left for country in 2004, so we recently had like a anniversary of, it's been 20 years since we left for country, and so a group of them got together in DC. I wasn't able to join them, but we've had some reunions and got together on like a Zoom call, and a lot of times if we're in a neighborhood where volunteers live, we'll meet up and have dinner or lunch or whatever.
Yeah.
And of course now with Facebook and social media, we follow each other and share.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Some folks have stayed really close with host families and things like that.
To you.
Not
some of your
not
host
to me.
families?
Some of I kind of lost touch with my host family, unfortunately. I moved around a little bit, and then of course once Alina I was writing letters back and forth to Alina and her family, but of course once she went to university, we kind of lost touch a few years after I came back, and I have not been back to Ukraine. It's always on my list. Unfortunately, it's not a safe place to visit recently, so it will still be on my list.
What did the Ukrainians who were your friends in your assignment, did they ever talk about the Russians?
No, I mean there wasn't the level of animosity, I guess, that there is.
There wasn't much going on then either, was there?
The biggest thing we have, so in 2004 was the Ukrainian Orange Revolution. Which you can study. So this was where they had an election. The president that was kind of like the Western favorite was Yushchenko, and Yanukovych was kind of the two main candidates were Yushchenko and Yanukovych, and they had an election, and Yanukovych won. And the Ukrainians...
It was a democratic election, right?
This was the problem.
No.
So the Ukrainians believed that this election was rigged in some way, and that it was not a fair...
Who was rigging it?
At the time, I don't know that it really really came out that it was
There was
Russia.
no proof?
There was no... The way I remember it was that the outcome of the election was not fair. It was not done. It was interfered with in some way. It was not a legitimate election.
According to this side over here.
According to the Ukrainian people, it kind of is
all
large.
Ukrainian people.
Mostly central Western Ukraine.
Okay.
If you look into the Orange Revolution, this was where Yanukovych, during his campaign, there was allegations that he was poisoned by Russian agents, and you can see it in photographs, and that Yanukovych was put in power by Russia or whatever. But anyway, so the Ukrainians, they essentially protested. That would be the light way of putting it. And they were essentially petitioning that the election be redone, that they vacate the election results and they host a new election because that election was rigged. It wasn't fair. It wasn't valid. The results weren't valid. So Ukrainians from across the country were coming into Kiev and essentially set up at Maidan Nezalezhnosti, which is Independence Square in Kiev, and they created this tent city, and Ukrainians from all over the country were there, and they essentially camped out until they had their way, or I say not had their way, but until to essentially petition that this election be redone. It was a very interesting, as Peace Corps volunteers.
Was this toward the end of your service?
This was the middle. This was probably a little less than halfway through. So this is my first year in country.
All right.
And as Peace Corps volunteers, we do not get involved in
I was just going to ask you
politics of the
if they
country.
said to you, and what you're going to do is you're going to shut up.
You're not involved. I do remember, so at the time we were also having an election in the United States because it's 2004, so obviously it was a presidential election in the United States as well. They would be like, who do you want to be Ukrainian president? And I'm like, I can't, who do you want to be president in America? And I'd kind of say, well, here's who I'm leaning towards, you know, we'll see how it goes. And they're like, who do you want to be president of Ukraine? And I'm like, well, I don't really get involved with Ukrainian politics. I don't really have an opinion.
But some of them say, hey, come on.
You know,
Hey, you're
like,
just spouting the line. Who are you really
who
in
do you
favor?
want? And
Yeah.
you know, so they would, there was a lot of that. But Ukrainians would go and they would have, now the Peace Corps office was like 2 blocks from Independence Square. And so there was a lot of, okay, you're Peace Corps volunteers, you really need to stay away from the tent cities and you need to not. I will say that a lot of volunteers would go down, because in the evenings there would be these concerts and like bands and folks would perform, and you know, I think they camped out there for 3 or 4 months. I mean, it was through winter. You know, we're talking November, December. They're camped out.
Oh yeah.
And so in
A
the
tent city in the winter.
in the winter
Oh,
in Kiev. I mean,
my.
and they had medical tents set up. They had like individual, like you could see signposts that had different cities from around the Ukraine. That was like, okay, this is Kharkiv represented over here, and Lviv's over here, and you know, all of these, and it was wonderful. And you could see, you know, the Peace Corps staff that were host country nationals would kind of, they'd be packing up their, you know, stuff from the thing. And I definitely have some souvenirs, I will say, from the Orange Revolution. Some things that we had, and I did go down a couple of times. And you kind of see, it was hard to avoid, honestly.
What did the Orange Revolution refer to?
You know, right now I can't remember exactly why they called it that. I'd have to go back and look. Actually, I have a book on the subject. I have a whole book on the subject, and there's been some documentaries around it. But so there was a couple of times I remember I was coming into Kiev, which is where our Peace Corps offices were, and whenever you did the train that came out of Chivonograd, it would come through Chivonograd and through Lviv, and you'd get on this train. But it was an overnight train into Kiev, and I think I was coming in to meet with some other volunteers, or anyway, I was going into the Peace Corps office, but I was at the train station. It's like 11 o'clock at night, and there was all these people at the train station, and they were all going to Kiev for this protest. They were all heading to Kiev, and there was like a one-man band at the train plant, and people it was just like a really energetic and kind of party atmosphere. But there were so many people that when the train stopped at our station for maybe 5 minutes, so when you had to
stampede on, huh?
You had to know where your car was. You know, they would announce the number, the order of the cars were numbered. You had to try to get on your car pretty quick. But there were so many people that they just started waving folks onto the train, waving people on. And, I mean, there weren't really seats. They weren't checking tickets. They weren't, you know, none of that. But it was a lot of, you know, we're gonna get our democracy, and we're gonna have a fair election, and we're not gonna be run by, you know, foreign powers. And it was largely led by students. You know, students were really driving that movement, and you know, younger generations. But everybody was going. I mean, a lot of the people that I worked with were on their way. Oh, well, we're going to Kiev. We're going to be there, and you know, they'd take time off their jobs.
Did some of your students go?
Most of my students were too young. I work primarily with kind of 8th form, so kind of 8th graders or so. But the folks that I worked with at the NGOs, the adults, co-workers, did definitely go. And they did eventually, the Ukrainian Supreme Court did vacate that election. They did host a new election, and Yushchenko was declared the president, and he served his term as president. And then they were like, I was like, oh, who, there was who won. And I was like, well, the person I was going to vote for, the person I vote for, U.S. president, they didn't win. And it's like, oh, you should have a revolution. That's what we did. And I was like, we don't really do that in the United States. We've had our revolution.
Yeah, we had
we've done. But it was really an interesting time during those elections. That was the only time we did have some questions like, will we be evacuated? Are we? We never thought we were going to leave country. They did have a shelter in place on election day.
Why would you even be thinking about being evacuated? For what reason?
Well, there was some concerns, especially in Eastern Europe and some other places where, around the same time as the Orange Revolution, there started to be a little more aggression towards foreigners. Any foreigners.
Any foreigner?
Across the board. So, and especially in Eastern Ukraine. So, on the days kind of leading up to the new election, especially the new election, they did pull some volunteers from Eastern Ukraine and have them kind of stay a couple of days with volunteers in places in Western Ukraine, just for safety. And then, like I said, we did do, I don't know if this is how it was when others served, but Peace Corps kind of has a rule where you have to be in contact with every volunteer within 24 hours, and you have to be able to get them out of the country within 48 if there's ever an emergency.
No, we had nothing like that.
That was sort of our rule. So we had like a warden. It was called a warden. That essentially was a central location in a major city, a Peace Corps volunteer that was stationed at a central location in a volunteer. That was if there was ever an emergency, we needed to get out of the country quickly, we would all head to this volunteer.
Yeah.
We were assigned a person. And so I think we did do a drill where everyone, you had to be in contact with your host, you had to be at your warden's house within 24 hours. And you did a drill, and then the warden basically confirmed that everyone had made it, how long it took everyone to get there.
Now, was this drill just always done? I mean, it was
No,
just part of...
no, I think we only did it the one time, and I don't know if we did it because of that, or it was just, okay, we're going to do this. It's like a fire drill, practice.
Like a fire
you
drill.
would just do it.
Yeah.
I don't know if they had scheduled to do one and had planned, but I do remember us doing like a drill that I don't know if we all had to, but essentially that's what we did.
But you didn't have the sense that something is about to happen here. And...
No, we were never really concerned we were going to have to leave.
Okay.
We did, like I said, during like election days or things that had potentially for tension, they would ask us to kind of shelter in place. Basically, kind of on this day, we're asking volunteers to stay home and just be a little more cautious when going out. Just because.
But you kept going to work.
Yeah, I mean, most of the times there was like a holiday anyway, and most people weren't working. But like I said, I don't remember there was never a point in Ukraine when I ever felt unsafe. I know
from gangs or anything
from
else?
anything at any time. I never really felt super unsafe. I think.
What about natural disasters? Did you ever have earthquake, floods, anything like that you were fearing might
No, we
affect
didn't.
you?
We didn't have any of that in Ukraine. There was a period of time, like more things that happened to us in Eastern Europe is political rather than natural disaster.
Okay.
I think. There was a period of time where I think the European Union and Russia were having like a dispute over gas, like natural gas pipelines, and so the natural gas was cut off. And so of course, as I mentioned,
in the winter too,
winter,
right? Yeah.
So there were people. They essentially, not just volunteers, but schools in Ukraine, like pulled students and things from Eastern Ukraine into Western Ukraine.
Wow.
For a period of time because there was no gas and no heat essentially in Eastern Ukraine for, I don't remember how long that happened, but there was a while.
And who cut this gas off?
Well, it's Eastern Europe, so a lot of things are still were still centralized. So, especially in Eastern Europe, in Eastern Ukraine, a lot of the natural gas and heating all still comes from Moscow. It still came from Russia.
So the Russians cut it off.
Russians essentially cut it off so that it wouldn't flow to Europe. Essentially,
Ukraine was kind of in the way, I guess would be, it
Wow.
comes through there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and of course, because it's centralized, there were some things that were like for example, heat in general would be turned on by the city, by the government, on October 15th, and would be shut off on April 15th, regardless of the weather.
Huh.
And there would be times where there would be no gas in the whole city. And, you wouldn't know why, you wouldn't know when it would come on. It was just, there's not working today. We also had, and this is one of those things where we had, running water and electricity and access to natural gas, and we could cook in our rooms. But like in my city, hot water was not a thing we all had. Some volunteers didn't have running water at all. They lived in places that didn't have running water. But in my city, like, hot water would be on from 6 to midnight, weekdays from 6 to midnight, and on the weekends it would come on at 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., and 6 a.m. to midnight.
Okay.
So that's when you had hot water. And most volunteers had some 5-liter bottles of water throughout the house. If for some reason there was no water when you woke up that day, you didn't really know. This was one of the things that I thought made Ukraine a little more challenging than some places that, you knew. That was one of your things. As your routine, you would get up, you would go get water, you'd come back, whatever. But in Ukraine, you never really knew whether or not it was going to work that day. You never really knew whether or not your heat would be on or your water would work, or it said you had hot water from 1 to 3, but the hot water might not be working that day. And it was all centralized, so you just had to wait for it to come back. There was no...
Okay, and I want to differentiate incompetence from intent here. And so when the heat wouldn't be on, was this incompetence or was it someone's intent? We're going to cut it off.
No, I think sometimes it was just, these systems are old. They're former Soviet construction, that's what they're working with.
Yeah.
So sometimes it just wouldn't work. They may be working to get it back on, they may be trying to do it. For example, if there wasn't any gas, it could be that there was some political thing happening and Ukraine got caught in the middle, and that might be the reason. Sometimes it was just, it's not working right now, we don't know why it's not working right now. So I don't necessarily think that it was always malicious, it just, that was the system. The same thing, one of the things I found was really interesting, especially in the time I served, is that you would see a BMW drive down the street followed by a horse-drawn cart.
Mm-hmm.
And the horse-drawn cart would be some former army wagon that was repurposed. Most of the homes had rotary dial telephones with you'd have TV and you'd have, but your phones would be rotary dial telephones, but almost everyone had a cell phone.
Did you have one?
I did. I had a couple cell phones. One I did get one stolen once. It was an interesting experience. But you would buy little prepaid phone cards and you could do a cell phone, but if I wanted to use the internet, I would have to go to a telephone company or an internet cafe and pay for, a couple hryvnia for a few hours of internet, and that was how often I could use it.
But you could do that.
I could
and
do
you
that.
Did do that.
I did do that.
Yeah.
So every week or so, I would, maybe check email, or sometimes I would try to schedule a call, but I mean, it could get really expensive, 50,
Oh, yeah.
it's expensive to make a long distance international phone call. Now, I did find that I could do them from my cell phone, and they were actually a little bit cheaper to make the calls on my cell phone. So I started doing that, is calling on if I wanted to call home.
Did you call home?
I did. I had a friend of mine who worked at the school that I was with, that he ended up moving to the States about halfway through my, middle of my second year, early of my second year of service. And so we would call, and sometimes he'd call me, and it was because, this 7-hour time difference, so occasionally I would call. My mom came to visit me in Ukraine. She spent 2 weeks
Oh,
with
she
me
did? Wow, that's great.
when I was serving. So
Wow.
she came, I think, August of 2005. She spent 2 weeks with me.
Oh, what a great experience.
It was great. She was trying to learn some Ukrainian, but she was like, I spent 2 weeks, I couldn't speak to anyone. We were walking through the village, through my town, to run around one time, and I forget who it was, but one of the teachers, I think, who was working for a local radio station, and they were like, hey, they're working for the local radio. I was like, well, this is my mom, she's visiting. It's like, oh, we should, what does she think? And they said, we should interview her. We should interview you. And I was like, well, my mom doesn't speak Ukrainian. She's like, you can translate for her. It'll be fine. And I was like, I don't know about this. So I called my host country counterpart and was like, I think they want my mom to go on the radio. And so I was like, so I handed the phone over, and he's like, okay, they're going to interview you. You will translate for her. It will be good. And I was like, okay. So we did this whole interview where they would ask my mom a question, and I'd try to translate it, and then try to translate her answer. So I was the translator for this interview. And I was like, I remember it being like, I am not getting all of this correct. I'm getting the gist of this story, but I do remember going to my school and being like, there was a lady there, she was the keeper of the keys. She managed all the keys for all the rooms in the school. She's like, I heard you on the radio. Your Ukrainian is so good. Or you did such a good job. And I was like, that's because you don't understand my English. You don't know how bad my translation was. That's how I felt about it. But it was a lot of fun. And we did the trip. I took my mom. We traveled to Germany while she was there. And I was like, Mom, you're gonna have to trust me. I can get us to Germany, but you're gonna have to trust me. And so I was like, I remember going to Poland with my friends at Christmas. I can do that. And once we get to Poland, we can get a train to Germany, no problem. I was like, Mom, you're gonna have to trust me. And of course, this time it was summer, and we stayed with my friend in Kiev. We got on the little Mashritka. We got to the border. When we got to the border, there were all these people. And from the time I came to Ukraine, my mom had come, and at the time initially you needed a visa, and if you were going to come in another country, you needed a multi-entry visa to get into Ukraine. And from the time I arrived to the time my mom arrived, they had changed the rules, and if your stay was less than 90 days, you didn't need a visa.
No.
But my mom had gotten one, because when she applied, you still needed one. So she had this visa. We both had visas, but she had this visa in her passport. And I remember the border guards having a conversation about whether or not they needed to stamp the visas because they weren't needed anymore.
Yeah.
There was a whole conversation with them about whether or not they should stamp the visas, whether or not what they should do. And so eventually I think they decided that it wasn't going to make a difference, and I think they stamped them and moved on. But then when we were waiting on the side to get into Poland, and there was all these people, and I heard a lady behind me being like, she tapped me on the shoulder, said something, and she said, "You're Americans, you don't have to wait in this line. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, you don't need to wait here. You can go around. So then she started yelling at the Polish border. It's like, Amerikanci. And so we walked over and I showed them our passports, and well, I could hear her behind me being like, she speaks Ukrainian, telling a friend of hers, she understands Ukrainian. And so they were like, telling me in Ukrainian all this, that I didn't have to wait here and that I was American and I didn't have to be with everyone else. And so, but we went over to the thing and showed our passports to the Polish border guards, and they like led us under this barricade, and we kind of walked around this crowd of people, and I felt a little bad about it, but at the same time, glad I didn't have to stand in that trying line.
Yeah.
And we spent like a day or something in Krakow, and then got on a train to Berlin, and on the way back we took a bus. But it was definitely one of those where it's like you just have to trust me on how to do this. But she really enjoyed visiting.
That was really neat that
was
she
nice.
could come over and spend that time
with me.
Yeah. So after the language school, or did you spend the rest of your assigned time in that language school?
Yeah, I spent most of my time with the English school number 8, and then I still did English clubs with NGO Pleiada. I also did, probably one of the things I really enjoyed is I worked with several other volunteers to create. We created this manual. It was like this.
Create what now?
We created this curriculum, I guess. We wanted to do, like, Junior Achievement has got some really great language learning, and we wanted to do something like that. And we had talked with the Junior Achievement folks, and like, we don't have that in Ukraine, that doesn't exist. And we were like, can we kind of model something, create a similar type of thing? So we created like a similar type of thing where it had, I think it has like 14 lessons that essentially is designed around building a city. And so there's lessons on government and business, and they elect a mayor, and they create rules, and they run businesses, and they kind of create their town charter, and they do all these things. So I work with some volunteers to kind of design it, and then I piloted it with my kids in my school, and they put on a whole day.
Where did all these ideas come from for this?
Well, so one of them came from another volunteer. I think she was a Group 25 volunteer, and it was kind of one of her ideas, and I was like, I think this is amazing. This would be great. And so we kind of talked through what we thought should be in it. So like there was one lesson we talk about like the role of government. We talked about like what's the government's job, and so I was like, okay, well, what's the things the government need to do? And it's like they should provide you a house, a job, and money. Like that's, and I was like, okay, let's have a conversation about the government providing a house, a job, and money. And then I do remember we had a thing where they were talking about like, you kind of do where you create like a little budget, and okay, your city has $100,000 or 100 whatever money used, and where do you take it? And I'm like, well, the government shouldn't pay for university. Parents can pay for that. And I just remember it being these decision making that 10-year-old, 12-year-olds are making about, and their logic behind how they would do it. And we created little bank books, and it was a lot of fun to work on that project. So that
how long the project did this take?
It was
several weeks.
Several weeks. I know it was at least a couple of months, and kind of meetups and coming into Kiev and getting together and planning these. Like I said, I think that was one of the things. I think some of the volunteers lived in Sevastopol, and I know a lot of times we would meet at the Peace Corps offices and be like, we're going to get together and go through the tests and the curriculum and the design. And we had, most of it was in English, but we also had Ukrainian translations. So we worked with some people to make sure that we had our translations correct, so that Ukrainian teachers could use it and they didn't have to speak English to be able to do it. But it was a lot of fun. So that was not something that was tied to my my site, but something that I worked on and was related to my role as a business development volunteer that I really liked. I feel like a lot of the things I did in Peace Corps was
Feel like
random.
what now?
Random. I feel like a lot of the stuff I did was a little bit random. You know,
Oh.
I did English clubs and did grant translations, and I did this Our City manual, and I did some teacher training. I worked with some TEFL volunteers to do some teacher training workshops, and
This all sounds really
I did a
good.
baseball camp. You know, I volunteered at a baseball camp for a couple weeks in the summer.
Do
one
they
time.
play baseball over there?
No, baseball was new. And they called it a baseball camp. I think they really used softballs, but you know, it was more softball camp. But I don't think they cared much.
No.
But it was one of those cultural. We want kids to know baseball, something they don't get to. But it was a lot of fun to spend.
Well, I think it's great that you had that you showed that kind of flexibility and that it didn't get you in any trouble.
Yeah, no. There was a point where my regional administrator, I think it was probably a year and a half into service, and my regional administrator had come out and was visiting, and he's like, well, you know, you're not at your site, you know, should we move? I was like, I don't want to move.
Why would he even suggest that?
Well, because he was concerned that, like I said, he was concerned I wasn't doing it, like there wasn't enough work for me, or that I wasn't wasn't meeting my kind of service, what we would expect. And I was like, I don't want to move. I just feel settled, you know.
Yeah.
I just feel settled here, and I don't really want to go anywhere. So I don't want to have to start all over someplace new. So they let me stay where I was, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, I got to, you know, the closest I had another volunteer, Group 26 volunteer was in Sokol, a couple hours, you know, half an hour, 20 minutes from me. That's
Somebody
my cat.
wants you?
That's my cat. Yeah, she's just, I would yell at her, but I'm surprised she's even downstairs. She doesn't realize there's strangers in the house. And then, you know, I had volunteers that I'd studied with down in Lviv, and so I could go and visit them. And every so often I would take a trip into Lviv, and I'd have kind of like a language break a little bit. You know, I'd go, and at the time you could get there was a McDonald's in Lviv, and I would go there and go and get books in English, go to an English bookstore and buy an English book, and you know, go to a movie, which was usually in Russian, but you know, whatever.
Huh. That was a nice break.
It was a nice break. So usually I would try to do some, especially if I was using a lot of language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were quite happy where you were. You weren't thinking about
moving, leaving.
Were there were also times, I guess, when you try something and it didn't work so well?
It didn't work, yeah. It didn't work so well. You know, I think we tried doing other, like, after-school clubs, or, like, the English newspaper I started off at the school. I didn't, for a while they stopped running it, so I didn't really work on that very much anymore. I started teaching, like, English literature, which was hard to do, to teach 11th form, which is essentially seniors. English literature, and you can't teach American kids English literature.
Right.
But it was a lot of fun, and I think I learned a lot doing it. We also used to really articulate kind of, you know, the goal 3. We'd always be like, did you have a conversation today? Did you learn something new? Did you meet somebody new? We're like, goal 3, you're accomplishing what you know, what you need to do. That's that cultural exchange. You're achieving your goals here. So we really focused a lot on not just the tangible activity, but that culture. We really, I think our group especially put a lot of emphasis on that cultural exchange. And
Right.
did we?
So, as you were nearing the end of your stay there, was the political situation impinging on you at all?
No. By then, I mean, the Orange Revolution had ended, and we didn't really. There wasn't really political issues that we had when I was leaving my service.
So it wasn't a deal between the Russians and the Ukrainians at that time?
Yeah, no. Like I said, the Orange Revolution was the big, where they wanted to, they felt like their election hadn't represented the people, and they felt like they took action. It was peaceful. They didn't. None of what we see in Ukraine today was happening at the time. None of that was happening.
Could you even have predicted it?
Maybe. I mean, I probably wouldn't have, but I mean, later on in 2014, with the Revolution of Dignity, the issues where they started Russia, annexed parts of Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine, and
that was about 2014.
That's about 2014,
okay.
And those volunteers did evacuate. They evacuated volunteers during that.
And you were well aware of this.
Yeah.
Well, everybody was.
Everybody was.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's some really great documentaries about it. I think right now there's one on Netflix that's the Winter on Fire is about it. Is about all of that, what happened in 2014. It's one of those things where it started in 2014. It started the way it was in 2004. It started with a peaceful demonstration largely run by students.
Uh-huh.
I think the huge difference was the response by the government, because at this time, Yanukovych, whose election was overturned in 2004, was president in 2014, and he responded. They responded with police, with very
people in jail?
Violently, with essentially riot police.
Oh.
Is how he responded to these protests, as opposed to letting them be peaceful and run their course, which is what they were originally designed. So obviously I'm watching this from home by that
But are
point.
you also getting accounts from some of your friends?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, like I said, some of my Peace Corps friends and some from my, I still follow and hear updates from my language instructors and former Peace Corps staff that were there, kind of their feedback and what they were doing. So some of it I'm watching from afar in 2014, because obviously I've been away for 10 years since then. But
yeah.
It was very hard to watch in 2014, because I remember it from 2004. I remember it being like a strange combination of 60s March on Washington and Woodstock in 2004. We are taking our future in our own hands in 2004, and in 2014 it was a violent clash.
Mm-hmm.
That ultimately had, the President Yanukovych fleeing the country, and violence that's what resulted in, and that's kind of stemming from all the things that are happening now, are stemming from essentially things that happened in 2014.
Let me ask this about your accomplishments. Those things that you think about most and maybe are proudest of from your 2 years there. Could you, you've already talked about some that I think will be on your list.
Yeah, well, obviously the our city thing that we did, that worked really well, but I do think, some of the students and the people that I've met, I think a lot of I know what some of them have been up to since then. Some of them became lawyers, and some of them became, interpreters, and they're all doing such wonderful things.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I really felt when I was in Ukraine is that at the time I kind of was like, I might be the only American these people ever meet, they ever interact with, and I want that interaction to be a good one.
Absolutely.
So I do think that it was, just that cultural exchange. Like I said, Peace Corps goals are, that technical knowledge that you're bringing from the States, that cultural knowledge that you're taking from the country, and then that you're bringing it home and bringing it back. And I've been able to do that since I've been back. There was a Girl Scout troop. I did a World Thinking Day. I went and talked to them about Ukraine. Hearing from a returned Peace Corps volunteers is one of the ways you can get that badge, and I'm like, absolutely, I'm happy to share. That
was here locally?
That was, I think I went down to Ardmore. They reached out and they contacted volunteers, local, semi-local, and I was like, absolutely, I'll come down and chat. So that was lots of fun. Even now, I tried it. This year was the first year I tried to make Pascha, which was an Ukrainian Easter bread. I've never been brave enough to try it, but I made it this year, and so I still try to stay connected. I think I only stayed there the 2 years, and unlike some other folks in my group, I haven't really had the opportunity to go back. But it still is a big part of who I am, what I do.
Yeah.
It's definitely on my list to go back. I'd love to be able to visit and connect with folks.
When things settle down.
When things settle down.
Yeah.
As the Ukrainians say, when they win. That's when we'll go back.
When what?
When they win.
Oh, yeah, sure.
When the Ukrainians win, because that's
did you know Zelensky's name when you were there?
No, he wasn't really popular when he was there. We had obviously Yanukovych, we knew, Yushchenko, we knew.
But I mean, Zelensky was a comedian.
He was a comedian.
Yeah,
he was a comedian. I don't exactly know, but it was one of those interesting things where life imitating art. He was a comedian, was on a lot of variety shows, and then he had a show where he was a teacher who was like in the show, he was like a teacher, a normal person, kind of, who jokingly was like running, talking about the government, and then he ran for president, won, and that's sort of what happened with him.
Yeah, but I mean, when you were there, had you ever even heard of him?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, he was... Not really, no.
Yeah.
He was not a figure that I was familiar with when I was there.
All right. Well, let's talk about one more thing, and that is I'd like to give everybody the opportunity to tell me if they think Peace Corps was transformative for them. A lot of people say yes.
I would say, I don't know if transformative is quite the word I would use. I think it has definitely had a huge influence on my life, my path, how I approach things since I served. I'm interested in things that I didn't think I would be interested in before. I think it definitely impacted and influenced my career goals, for example. As I said, when I came back from Peace Corps, I did some other things, but I did some work for a political consulting firm for a while during 2006 and 2008, and then I did another year of AmeriCorps Vista, and now I work with National Service Programming. I've been working with National Service Programming for the last...
National Service?
Yeah, so I managed AmeriCorps Vista and AmeriCorps State National programs. I work with AmeriCorps programs now. Kind of national service in general. I've promoted, help other people that were like, hey, you served, can you help me with my motivational statement? Can you help me, people ask me, what was it like to serve? What would you do?
Yeah.
All of that, I don't think I would have the perspective on the world that I have if I hadn't have served.
I'm sure that's right.
That I think I'm more open to, you kind of are like, they kind of tell you things like, you don't know the country, or you don't know the communities. In domestic national service, like Vista especially, they will say, that community knows the community better than you. You are not there to say, you're there to help them do the things they need, but they need to tell you what they want to do, and you can work them. That was how I really felt that in Ukraine, where it was kind of that first time I really understood that you're a guest in their world, and whatever they want to teach you and share with you, that's the thing you need to learn, regardless of.
But you can share things with them too.
You can share things too, and you do, but it's not always the way you think it will be. I was a business development volunteer. I had my mind. I had just finished a master's degree and MBA, and I have in my head what business development means.
Yeah.
But business development is also building relationships and giving people different perspectives and learning.
Like you said
different
earlier,
perspectives.
you just don't jet in and say, hey, and hit sign right here and leave.
Yeah, one of the first things when I got off the train, I was coming in the evening from Kiev. I was arriving the first time in my permanent site. We were heading from the train station to my host family's house in Chervonorad. And the host country counterpart was explaining to the taxi driver that I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I was a business volunteer, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And he's like, we don't need you here. The taxi driver, like, we don't need you. Our economy is good. We are not poor, or whatever.
Yeah.
Some version of that. And I was like, I'm not trying to fix your economy. Like, that's not my goal, but I understand. And later on, I mentioned that I had like an incident where I had to talk to the police at one point, and the police was like, well, we'll do that for you. Fix our economy, I'll help you. And I was like, I don't know if that's a fair trade, but it definitely was a lot of fun. And a really enjoyable experience. And I do think that I really felt like I got to live there, as opposed to, like if you're touristing or trying to pass through, it sticks with you.
Yeah.
It sticks with you.
Oh, absolutely.
So, like I said, I'm not sure if transformative is the word, but influential. I definitely think there's this heavy influence.
Okay. And did I hear you say earlier that you might even do it again?
Oh yeah, I absolutely would do it again. I tell people Peace Corps is my retirement plan. I'm like, I am absolutely on board with going and serving Peace Corps until I can't pass the medical screenings anymore, and that's what I'll do. 2 years, and then sign up, go to a different country, 2 more years, sign up, do it again, 2 more years. I would absolutely do that.
When does this begin?
I don't know. I don't know. As soon as you can't have a lot of debt. that was one of the things when I was doing it. I was like, I have to do Peace Corps now. I remember thinking, like, when I was going to college and I was doing it, I was like, I have to do Peace Corps now before I, get a lot of debt, or if I ever want to buy a house, or I want to do any of these things, I need to get this, do it now while the opportunity is right to do it. And I was like, I don't want to miss my chance.
So when financially it makes sense, you will.
Oh, well, absolutely.
Whatever that is.
Whenever that will be. There's no upper age limit for Peace Corps. I'm on board.
Nope. I'm wondering if you know where you'd like to go.
Like I said, I think I would really love to go to Northern Africa. That would definitely be on my list. I would love to go back to Ukraine, if there's, or other places in Eastern Europe. If that's an opportunity. I have a friend of mine, a person that served with me who came back to the States for a couple of years and then signed up again and did a term in, I think, Bulgaria or somewhere. I have a number of folks that have, work for the Foreign Service or for other State Department or other things that are serving and are traveling around. But I think Northern Africa, now it's different. You can actually pick an assignment now and kind of apply for a specific assignment now with Peace Corps. So, it might just depend on what the assignments are and where they go. But, learn another language. Practice one I've studied, in another language.
So is going back to the Ukraine high on your list, or
yes,
is it just something that you could do?
It's definitely high. I mean, I would go back even for a visit, 10 days, take a trip. It's definitely high on my list of things I would want to do as soon as it's...
This probably isn't a fair question, but what do you think is going to happen?
It's hard to say. I think it is a matter of how long the world stays interested. As far as the current situation in Ukraine, which obviously they're in, year 2 of full-scale war now in Ukraine. I will say one thing that is I think, and I was telling to some other folks, I've been volunteering with this organization that helps Ukrainian individuals that are wanting to practice English, and you essentially do through Zoom or whatever. You essentially
they're all over.
They're in Ukraine, students in Ukraine that are
okay.
wanting to practice English, and so you essentially have conversations. Sometimes it can be more formal learning, but a lot of so I'm working with someone, and I was telling my family, and I was telling some other people, especially as a couple years ago when the full-scale invasion into Ukraine kind of began. I was like, I don't know what they're thinking. Like, the one thing that the people in Ukraine are resilient. It's not the first time they've been invaded. It probably won't be the last time that someone tries to, take them over.
Yeah.
They've been times when they've tried to eliminate, others have tried to eliminate their language, or tried to eliminate their culture. And I think they will. There's not a question whether in their mind in that, and this is my opinion, but I don't feel like there's a question as to whether or not they have the will to succeed, to overcome an invasion, and I think there's no. Even if their entire country was occupied, they would still be Ukrainians, and they would still be a strong people that has their language and has their culture and maintains it for the future. I think that is not going to go away. I mean, they were under Soviet rule for, under the Soviet wing forever, and they didn't lose their identity.
No, they didn't.
That wouldn't stop them.
They're very admirable people.
Yes.
Very admirable.
And so I think it is a matter of will, and not so much strength or power. I think it's a matter of will.
Okay. So it could go on for.
It could go on for a long time. And I think that most, obviously now people know. Like, as I said before, when I first went to Ukraine, they're like, we had to look it up on a map. People didn't know where this was, but people now know where they are, and I'm sad that a large portion of the world had to find out how strong these people are like this.
When it's almost destroyed in the process of finding out where it is.
But all of that is, I think, like I said, I think it's a matter of time and will. I don't know that. I think the Ukrainians' will last longer. Their desire to be free and independent will outlast and the desire to conquer them.
Okay. Now, one last thing that I just thought of that I almost always offer people at the end is when you were thinking about me coming over and thinking about maybe what you would say, was there something that occurred to you that you haven't said? Something that you really wanted to cover, and for one reason or another, it wouldn't fit in, you forgot about it, whatever.
You know, I don't really think of anything. I definitely, you know, things like the Orange Revolution and all of that were a big part of my service. I think the time frame that I served. I also think that it's my time serving in Ukraine and my Peace Corps experience is going to be significantly different than someone that served even 5 years after me.
Sure.
And especially someone that would serve today, or, you know, when it's safe to have volunteers back. I think their country is ever evolving, but I don't know. I think that it's just I was trying to think of what would be like key things about my time and my service that might be unique to, or even similar to other people's service.
Sure.
But I think we covered most of it.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I always told somebody if I ever wrote a book, I'd have a whole section on my train rides, just because, I mean, that's where you met some wonderful people. I think on my train to one of the train rides I took, I met this girl. She was studying English at the university, but also they found another person at this gentleman on the train, but he was a Ukrainian paratrooper who had served in Desert Storm. And he had been trained in Germany, and he found out I was American, and he wanted to talk to me about the American soldiers he had served with, and he had this harmonica that these German soldiers had given him, and he was sure, I know American songs, and we stayed up all night, and I have a pin. He gave me a little plastic pin that is Ukrainian paratrooper pins. So it's just these really short, kind of, I don't know that. I don't remember that person's name. We talked one night on a train, conversations. But it's those kinds of things that I think are those are the stories that you bring back. That that goal 3 that you're like,
absolutely.
Ukrainian paratrooper playing me "Old Susanna" on this harmonica at 1 o'clock in the morning on a train to Odessa or something. It's that kind of story that that I think encapsulate your service.
All right. I think that will